Hey class, we're in chapter 3 of your new text that we're using, and I just wanted to talk to you. We're out of Yalom, which some of you may feel like that's a relief. I do feel like this textbook is the group counseling book. I do feel like it's a pretty easy read. I do think ops also, like, not to give too much of a push, but I do think they do a really good job into choosing their text material. Um, I know you may not have time to read everything as in-depthly or um, as much as you would like, as you have a lot of reading, not only with my course, but other courses you are in. But I do feel as though, based on my own personal experience, that ops does a great job in picking out textbooks that are really applicable and informative and not too wordy, but just really purposeful in their choosing. So I really do like this text. I do think it's pretty easy to, um, I think it's pretty easy to understand. But anyways, so, again, going back to group, we are looking at legal and ethical things, considerations. So ethical issues talk about, like, ethical things are maybe standards that we have, standards, law and ethical law. I'm sorry, I can't say ethics without saying law. Ethical standards that we have are maybe things based on values, principles, codes, things that maybe wouldn't be illegal, but is it the right thing to do? And then legal things tend to be a little bit more black and white. It's like this is against the law or this is not against the law. Ethics sometimes can feel like that gray area. And so when you're dealing with this, we need to be mindful of both of those contexts, right? So you want to be able to make sure as a leader that one, you're competent in legal and ethical things. Now, for example, we're going to talk about this probably as we go through this chapter. This is something that's kind of unique for your group is confidentiality. Um, Now, if it's a one-on-one therapy session, the confidentiality really relies obviously primarily on the therapist because you're the one receiving the information. When it comes to group, it's a little different because there's all the group members. Now, they will sign something more than likely based on your site's paperwork, based on your private practice's paperwork, whatever that may be. They will sign something saying that they won't break confidentiality, but the reality is that there are a bunch of people that aren't held to the same standards as we are as therapists. So there is a likeliness that Susie in the group could go tell all her friends about Joni in the group, okay? And that is something that would be considered unethical, wouldn't be considered right. But at the same time, like, group members are very much aware that that could happen. That's kind of a risk of group, right? Um, but we talk about that as a group when you're leading the group. We talk about that because it's not right that people do those kinds of things. I mean, it could become a personal lawsuit situation. Obviously, we are held to the same legal confidential standards as we would be held to being a group leader, but we can't control all the different people that could be in the group. Okay, so again, clinical issues involving your professional judgment. We need to make sure that we are doing everything that is legal and ethical. We are considered mandated reporters, whether that's an individual or group, a couple, a family, whatever that may be. So if something comes up in group, you do have to report. We want to be aware of people's cultural backgrounds. We want to be aware of diversity, maybe sexual preference, sexuality, um, things of that nature that may affect what's going on in the group, their religious affiliations, any other value differences or things that could be conflictual. I think, especially during this season of life, knowing that we're coming up to a political year, that's going to be something that a group leader should be mindful of because those are things that could derail a group and get sidetracked in thousands of rabbit trails that you don't need to go on to. And that can be very stressful. Now, same with individual clients. You're going to have an informed consent for the group, okay? So that's going to talk about what the group is, the goals of the group, the structure of the group, what's expected of them if they join the group, and what's expected of you as the leader. And this would probably be a form that you give out at the beginning, something that they'll sign. They may have a copy of it. You have a copy of it for their file. But something to be mindful of. Now, many groups are composed of people who choose to be there. and many groups are chosen by people who are forced to be there. So, for example, an involuntary group could be maybe something that's court mandated, something that's in an inpatient setting, things of that nature. So, there can be a challenge with that kind of group potentially. Um, and so, just being mindful of like not all group members are going to be super thrilled about having to be there. Um, and we can't make something valuable to you, right? Um, Even with mandated counseling, individual counseling, it can be tricky at times. And so just not taking that personally and being willing to work with the person despite maybe the challenges they may give you is going to be important. But it's just something to be mindful of, that obviously versus a voluntary group where everyone's choosing to come, their buy-in might be a little different than someone's being forced to come. Okay. Now, just because someone's forced to come doesn't mean they're not ready to change. Sometimes that's what it takes to get them there, but by the time they get there, they're ready. But it's also to not be surprised if people aren't super thrilled about being there. There should be a process on how a person leaves the group. Assuming it's voluntary, they have a right to leave the group. Some natures of groups are very much like open, so they can come and go as they please. Some groups aren't like that, and so there should be a process on how people leave the group, and also letting people know. There's a way too that can be kind of detrimental for group members, and so what's the appropriate way to handle that in the group, and when's the best time to leave the group, and things of that nature. That's important that you go over. So psychological risks of group participation, potential risks that group leaders need to monitor: a misuse of power, um, by members, sometimes by the leader. People just really getting overly confident in what they're able to do in the group. Some people really pressuring other people to share or to disclose, and that's not the idea either. You want that, to happen more organically, um, and not be something that is felt as if they have to do it because everyone's like giving them a hard time, or one person's really giving them a hard time. Confidentiality is a reality that it can be broken due to the nature of it being a group and how the group uh, again, we can't make everyone not say anything, but hopefully the trust that's grown in the group will be that people respect not to say anything in the group as a way to protect one another, because they wouldn't want someone else to talk about their business to other people, and so based on that, they themselves don't do that. Um, Confrontation can happen in a way that's not done well. Not to say that can't be used as a learning tool, but that like is kind of a crappy feeling if you're the person that gets exploded on or emotionally vomited all over. Sometimes people use someone as a scapegoat. Maybe they remind them of someone. We talked about that earlier, but they just choose to have that person be the butt of their of their problems for whatever reason that week or that day. It kind of makes me think of the I've just been watching The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. Some of you may be watching that, and it makes me think of when he just decided to really target one of the players on his team, Scott Burrell, and like every joke, everything is like Scotty Burrell, and I just think, it just made me think like, wow, that guy must have been like a really really easygoing. It seemed like he had a lighthearted attitude. He could joke with it, because some person that's very sensitive would have like broken with that kind of like attention and constant being a butt of jokes or being made comments made after them. Like it would have really worn on a person. It sounded like he didn't really mind, but those kinds of things, like depending on a person's personality, it's not good for them. Okay, nor is it necessarily right. Getting more in detail about confidentiality. It's a foundation of a group. What it entails, you need to go over that. The consequences of breaching confidentiality, and leaders need to remind members at various points in a group of the importance of maintaining confidentiality. Some groups go over group roles every single week because sometimes they have new members. And I think confidentiality is important to reiterate over and over and over again, because it's something that people very easily can forget, or maybe imperative information is shared that week, and so it's just a friendly reminder that's thrown out there, like don't forget, like we're supposed to maintain confidentiality. um, it's a reality that members can breach confidentiality, and again, the ethical and legal dimensions of confidentiality, understand the limits of privileged communication in a group, being able to explain that to group members. um, And so again, confidentiality, we really need to, um, I think, help the group see the buy-in to confidentiality and why it's important that we're respectful of the information that's shared and how we expect our group members to share our information. And that would be that they don't share it with people outside of this group. And two, we don't want the information shared to be used against group members. And so that's a really big part of group. And I think that's one of the main reasons why people don't open up, because they're afraid of trust being broken and things of that nature. So our values as leaders in a group, this can be hard. Our values as people, work ethic, things of that nature, obviously that should be demonstrated in a private practice setting, a group setting, couple setting, family setting, whatever. But um, sometimes our religious or our personal political values or um, our personal values for decisions we would make are not usually used at all in therapy. And that for some of you that might be really hard. Like, how can I not? This is part of who I am, and I agree. Like, being a Christian is part of who I am, but that's not where everybody else is. That's in my office, and it's my job to come alongside every person who comes in my office, regardless of where they're at. And it's not my job to push my values on them. It's my job to meet them where they're at. And that would be the same as a group. So it's being aware of how your values influence you, how they influence your reactions, how it influences the things that you say to group members. You cannot impose your values on people. Um, you want people to be able to see, like, you can ask questions to help them to recognize their values and where they stand, but it's not your job to impose your personal values, whether they be good or not, onto other people. That's not our job as a group leader. Um, and so we have to be very mindful and careful of that. And sometimes we're not even aware of how we're implying something or how it may come off. And so, that might be some feedback that you get from a group is like, hey, when this topic came up, you kind of acted a certain way, which made me believe that, this, that, or the other. And that might be a way for you to learn something, because we're not going to know all the areas that we need to grow in, automatically. But this allows for us to maybe take in that kind of information and know for next time what I maybe need to do differently. um, Young in the field, I think this was harder for me, or I had a lot of expectations of what I thought this would look like. And I think as time has gone on, one, I've learned, by the grace of God, there go I, that I could be anyone that enters my office. And I think in that, it's very humbling, because I realize, like, sure, maybe I don't struggle with a drug addiction, but I could. Like, I'm capable. I'm capable of all things, bad or good. And so realizing that I'm human and I can make mistakes, I think, one, allows me to see my clients a little differently, because I know, like, I'm not better than them. And I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. And hopefully that's never reflected to anyone who comes in my office. Like, I come, like, we're all capable of making bad choices, making bad decisions. That doesn't mean we're bad people. Um, and so, it's something that we need to be mindful of as people tell us really hard things, or really upsetting things, or disappointing things that maybe if you heard that in your personal life, you would react a certain way. But when you have the therapist hat on, that's not a way you can react or respond. Considerable harm is possible when diversity exists within a group and the leader fails to use a multicultural approach. So, being mindful of the different demographics in your group and how that affects the group. Um, we're supposed to have a general understanding of different cultural background and information, and so to make sure that we are aware of those things. Um, and that is only going to help us to be more um, in tune with our group, help with maybe some things that could be seen as maybe not come off right by a group member, but we might be able to swing that a different way when we throw in a cultural view or things of that nature. It's just really being aware of who's coming in your group, and how that could potentially, help bond your group, or it could help destroy your group if you're not kind of in control of what's going on. Okay, sexual orientation. You have to be very much aware of these things. You know, um, you want to make sure your group is inclusive, that you're inclusive. Um, you need to make sure, like, regardless of your personal thoughts and values on that, you need to make sure you are very much aware and present for all your clients. And we can't like show any sort of bias towards any group of people. And so making sure that we're not biased, we're not uncomfortable, making sure like we're setting the tone, because there could be someone in your group that is. And so how to model that for them, work through that with them, it could be really great or it could be really difficult. And so just making sure that you are aware of how you are in the group, so that's not an additional tool to be used against a person. We want it to be safe for a person who may be coming into a group that maybe is primarily heterosexual, but they're homosexual, wanting to make sure everyone feels comfortable. You want to create a climate of safety, may feel safe to disclose. Again, we don't want anyone to feel like they can't be safe to be open, to share things of that nature. And that very easily could happen if we don't set the tone correctly as the group leaders. Okay? So as group leaders, we need to kind of know what we're doing, right? And so we don't want to do, and this is the same with individual therapy, right? You shouldn't use techniques you're not familiar with. We shouldn't do things to make us be more in control or feel more empowered, because that's about us. It's not about the group. We don't want to make things more intense than they need to be just because we like intensity. And we don't want to use things to pressure members when they decided that they don't want to participate in something for whatever reason. We don't want to overly pressure someone into doing what we want. That would be seen as manipulation, not very healthy, nor is that good. So something, again, to be mindful of. So, theories of group. Theory is like a roadmap. It's a way to guide. It gives you directions, where to stop along the way. But even within that, we have to be flexible because we're dealing with a group of people. And even though we might have a plan or how this should go, that doesn't mean that's the way it's always going to go. And so we want to be mindful of that when we're working through, when we're using theory, technique, and just developing like a treatment plan or whatever for our group. We want to be mindful of it may not go always as planned, but that's okay because we're working with different people and we can't be extremely controlling, So an integrative approach to group practice, developing an integrative approach is a process that will likely take you years to evolve as you gain experience. You want to look at yourself, your personality, your strengths, your experiences, and see what techniques and concepts works best with you. I tell therapists all the time, you have to be able to be yourself in the therapy room. If you can't be yourself, then you're doing it not only injustice to your clients, but you're doing an injustice to yourself, and you're going to get burned out in this field. When I am in my office, not that it's about me, but I am very much me. And like nobody or anything is going to take that away from me, because if I'm not me, then I'm not going to be able to be my best self for my clients. So I sit how I want to sit. My office is decorated how I want it to be decorated. I am very much comfortable because my comfort is important. One, because I'm sitting there all day, but two, because if I'm comfortable, I think my clients are going to be more comfortable, right? And I have to be obviously appropriate, legal and ethical with all the people that I come across, but I'm very much me. So what you see is what you get. If you ever have had a class with me, what you see is what you get. That's just, I feel like I have to be true to myself that way. That's how God created me. Obviously, I feel like I'm still very professional in my opinion, but it's very much, I'm comfortable with who I am. And that's important for you to be that with your clients, but obviously in a professional, legal, and ethical way. Okay? So a thinking, feeling, and behaving model combining the following three domains is the basis for a powerful and comprehensive approach to counseling, right? Thoughts, behaviors, beliefs. We talked about that a lot in a cognitive behavioral therapy. So again, cognition focuses on thinking, affect, talking about feelings, and behavior obviously is how we act out. With a group, you want to make sure that again, if you're going to do in a technique, it's one applicable. It applies to what the group is talking about. It makes sense. It's something everyone can do, meaning like it's appropriate. Um, it should be something, again, that people are like, this makes sense that we're doing this because this applies to what we're doing. Okay. Virtually anything a group leader does could be viewed as a technique. So being silent, offering feedback, homework assignments, it could be an assignment in group. Um, sometimes like people get real caught up in like, well, what am I doing here? Well, sometimes it's just you're giving unconditional positive regard. You're listening to people. You're getting to know them. Like that is actually you doing something, although it doesn't necessarily feel like it, but that is you doing something. And again, techniques like feel more empowering when they are building upon what's already going on in group, right? And so it just kind of goes on to one thing to the other thing. So again, knowing the type of group you are, how ready everyone is, cultural background, even like educational background. Not that just because someone goes to college and someone doesn't, that doesn't necessarily mean someone has an intellectual deficit. However, I have led groups in different kinds of settings, like for example at a homeless shelter, and not everyone knows how to read. So if you're going to require people to read a passage aloud, be mindful of people's literacy. Like that, there's nothing like feeling on blast when someone is obviously identifying that like you can't read by the fact that you can't read and everyone's putting it out there, So just like being mindful of those kinds of things, because that could be kind of frustrating and upsetting. Um, for group members, and embarrassing if like not everyone's capable of doing what you're asking. I think of my kids all the time because they are in a dual language learning program, and so they, although they're obviously fluent English speakers, they primarily only read in Spanish, and so there's so many encounters that I worry about for them because if they're asked to read in English, they can't read English. They can, and if they do, it sounds very um, elementary compared to their age, and it's because they primarily read in Spanish, and so you just never know someone's circumstance, situation, language, preference, and how certain techniques could make someone maybe feel really uncomfortable or feel like really on spot. When that's not what you're trying to intend to do, it probably shows there's probably a purpose behind what you do, but just being aware of those kinds of things is important. And you may think like, why would I need to be aware of that? That's really going to come up, and it very much could come up. Okay, so different types of techniques and theories. So psychodynamic approaches, stress intensive insight in therapy, experiential and relationship oriented approaches, stress feelings and subjective experiences. There's a cognitive behavioral approach, which stresses the role of thinking and doing, and how it's affecting our behavior, right? And postmodern approaches stress understanding the subject's world of the client and tap existing resources for change within the individual. Okay. So a psychoanalytic theory, again, major techniques include maintaining the analytic framework, free association. They talk about that in individual therapy, interpretation, dream analysis. Two key features of psychodynamic group therapy are ways that transference and countertransference are played out in the context of the current group situation. So we talk about that a lot, like earlier, about how transference and countertransference maybe can even happen within the group based on who the members are in the group. And so just being very aware that that could be something that comes out if that's an approach you use. So the next existential approach. So we have self-awareness. We talk about sometimes with existentialism like self-actualization. Because we are basically free beings, we must accept responsibility that accompanies our freedom. Anxiety is part of the human condition. Death is also a basic human condition. The reality of our mortality heightens our sense of ultimate aloneness. So existential therapy reacts against the tendency to view therapy as a system. It can be kind of open-ended a little bit. I think of sometimes existential therapy as more kind of hippie a little bit. It's just not as structured potentially. Therapist interventions are guided by philosophical framework about what it means to be human, which can be very open-ended, right? A person-centered approach, the major goal is to provide a climate of safety and trust so that the client may be using therapeutic relationship for self-exploration, to become aware of blocks to growth. Because again, our whole goal in group is to be growing. You know, um, there's a lot of like experiential. You got Gestalt, Virginia Satir, with a lot of fun techniques that you can do, um, acting things out, maybe role playing a bit. Um, Now we have cognitive behavioral approaches. Again, still very similar to what you would think of when you're thinking of um, individual CogB, but the members and therapists collaboratively specify treatment goals. So, what are the goals? Behavioral interventions are individually tailored to specific problems. And that could be something that's done. You guys, the group members can kind of be learning about that and finding that out within the group. That could be part of the process, is trying to figure out what the behavior is. Maybe everyone in the group is targeting a specific behavior. And so everyone's working together on what their triggers are, what is maybe the irrational thinking that's associated with it, all those kinds of things. Learning to be present, mindfulness, in third wave cognitive behavioral therapy is a big part. Being grounded, being in the here and now, trying to figure out different ways to learn how to not have the same reaction to things as maybe we did in the past, based on former triggers or things of that nature. So there's a lot different things you can do in group. Probably never thought about that too much before this class. So I hope you found some of this information helpful. Some of these different approaches are going to depend too on the kind of group that you are. If you're working for more of a educational group to maybe an open process group, some of those approaches may look different. And so just to be mindful of the kind of group you're doing in order to best decide what kind of theory would work best, not to mention what kind of theory works best with you. So anyhow, I hope this is helpful. We're on our way to being done. Hang in there. I know we have a lot going on. I appreciate your guys' hard work. Again, this is week 5, and we have 3 more weeks to go. Okay, talk to you guys soon.